So there's a difference between a pattern and a mistake. A mistake is usually singular, isolated, a moment of poor judgment that doesn't define who you are. And then a pattern, on the other hand, is a series of choices, repeated behaviors, a trajectory that becomes impossible to ignore. And when that pattern spans 5 years, from an Olympic suspension to a domestic violence arrest to reckless driving, it's no longer just about individual incidents. It's about something deeper. On January 29th, 2026, Sha'Carri Richardson was arrested for driving 104 miles per hour in a 65 mile per hour zone. Body cam footages showed her pleading with the police officer, making excuses, and ultimately being taken into custody. But here's what makes this significant: this wasn't her first consequence, it wasn't the second. This is part of a pattern that goes back years. In 2021, Sha'Carri was suspended from the Olympics for marijuana use. In 2025, she has the domestic violence issue with Kristen Coleman, and then an incident on an airplane where she had to be kicked off. And then in 2026, she's being arrested for reckless driving. These incidents, 5 years, all have the same response every time: apologize, explain, and then move on. And when you step back and look at the full picture, what emerges isn't just a story about a traffic stop, it's a story about patterns, consequences, and what happens when accountability is repeatedly deferred. So let's talk about it. To understand the pattern, you have to see the full timeline. It goes back further than you might think. In June 2021, during the Tokyo Olympics, before Richardson even became an Olympic gold medalist, she was supposed to compete in the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, which was being held in 2021 due to the COVID. She had just won the 100-meter dash at the US Olympics trials, cementing her spot on the team. Then she tested positive for THC, the chemical found in marijuana, and was suspended from the competition. She missed the Olympics entirely. Richardson's explanation at that time was that she used the marijuana to cope with the death of her biological mother, which she had learned about from a reporter just days before the trials. She apologized publicly and said, "I know what I did. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what I'm allowed not to do, and I still made that decision." Whether that was actually an apology or not, well, you can have your say about that. But then at the time, many people sympathized with her. I mean, people were saying grief is real, loss is devastating, and the rule against marijuana seemed outdated to many, especially since it was legal in Oregon where the trials were held. And I would want to add to this that when she was interviewed by, I think was it Good Morning America or something, that's where she issued her apology. The host, in fact, actually tried to emphasize on the fact that marijuana use was legal in Oregon, even though she clearly knows what the anti-doping ban is when it comes to sprinters. She was trying to push that narrative and trying to emphasize on the fact that Sha'Carri happened to be in Oregon and marijuana use is legal in Oregon. But here's what matters for our purposes. Richardson herself acknowledged that she knew the rules and chose to break them anyway. That's not a judgment on marijuana use. That's an observation about decision making under pressure. So that's strike one. Not the arrest, but the consequence. A moment where rules applied and Richardson faced them. Now let's move forward. 4 years later, after Richardson had redeemed herself, won gold at the 2024 Paris Olympics, and become one of the most recognizable athletes in track and field, she was arrested at Seattle Tacoma International Airport. According to the police report, she got into an argument with her boyfriend, Christian Coleman, who is also an Olympic sprinter, at a TSA checkpoint. The surveillance footage showed Richardson pushing Coleman multiple times. At one point, she allegedly shoved him into a column. She was seen to throwing a pair of headphones at him as he tried to walk away. Coleman didn't want to press charges, so Richardson was released shortly after. She later issued a public apology on social media, saying she loved Coleman and blamed past trauma and pain for her actions. So here's the question. Was that accountability or was it damage control? Because accountability doesn't just mean saying sorry. It means recognizing the behavior, understanding why it happened, and making changes so it doesn't happen again. But then, less than 6 months later, we have another incident. And there was a prior incident on an airplane where she had a misunderstanding with a flight attendant and she had to be kicked off the flight. Richardson has been pulled over again for doing 104 miles per hour in a 65 mile per hour zone. And according to the arrest report, she was weaving through traffic, flashing her lights at other cars to move them out of her way, following too closely, passing vehicles on the inside shoulder, including a car with its hazard lights on. When the officer approached, Richardson tried to explain. She said her phone had accidentally changed her car settings. She said one of her back tires was low on air. She pleaded with the officer not to take her to jail. In fact, watching Sha'Carri plead with the officer actually broke my heart, because I don't know if that was the realization that her past actions are finally catching up to her, and this was her actually trying to, realize everything or not. But the officer wasn't having it, and frankly, neither should we. 2 arrests 6 months apart, different situations, yes, but the same underlying issue, a lack of accountability in the moment. So let's define what we are talking about here. A pattern isn't just doing something wrong twice. A pattern is when behavior repeats in a way that reveals something deeper about decision making, self control, or how someone responds when things don't go their way. And when you step back and look at Richardson's timeline, the pattern becomes very clear. In 2021, she had the marijuana suspension. And then what she says, she knows the rules. She breaks them anyway. She apologizes. She blames grief and trauma. And then she moves forward. 2025, with the airport arrest, she gets into the physical altercation with Christine Coleman. No charges are filed. She apologizes publicly. She blames past trauma. And then she moves forward. And then with the speeding arrest in 2026 as well, she drives recklessly at 104 miles per hour. She pleads guilty. She makes several excuses with the phone, the tire. The officer should work with her. She posts bond for $500 and then she moves forward. Do you see it? The pattern isn't just incidents themselves. It's the response. It's the same cycle repeating over and over. Behavior, consequences or potential consequences, explanation that shifts the blame, public apology if needed, and then she moves on. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Patterns persist when consequences don't stick. When you miss the Olympics, but then redeem yourself and become a hero 4 years later, what lesson is learned? The rules are temporary obstacles. When you can get arrested for domestic violence and walk away with no legal consequences, what incentive is there to change? When you can drive 104 miles per hour through traffic, endanger everyone around you, and get out the same day for $500, what real cost have you paid? The answer is not enough to change the behavior. And that's not just Richardson's fault. That's a system that treats celebrities differently. That's a culture that prioritizes redemption stories over actual accountability. Let's look at how Richardson responds when caught. In the body cam footage from the speeding arrest. She says, my phone accidentally changed the car settings. My tire was low. That's why I was speeding. I didn't even know I was speeding. Please don't take me to jail. I'm begging you. Can you work with me? Now, to be clear, I understand that no one wants to go to jail. I understand that in the moment, you're going to try to explain yourself. But there's a difference between explaining and deflecting. Explaining will sound something like, oh, you're right. I was driving recklessly. I put people in danger. I have no excuses for that. Deflecting sounds more like, it's my phone's fault. It's my tire. I didn't know. Please give me a break. You know? And that's the distinction actually matters, because deflection avoids responsibility. It puts the blame elsewhere. And when that becomes your default response, when every incident is someone else's fault or some external circumstances, you're not learning from your mistakes. You're just finding better excuses. Compare this to the airport incident. In her public apology, Richardson said she loved Coleman and blamed past trauma and pain for her actions, even though she had consciously tried to implicate Coleman in the whole situation and tried to get him arrested. But here's the question. If past trauma is the explanation for your behavior, what are you doing to address that trauma? What steps are you taking to ensure it doesn't happen again? Because 6 months later, we have another arrest. Different situation, yes, but the same pattern. The same behavior, consequences, excuses, and then we move on. And at some point, we have to ask, when does the cycle break? Here's the broader issue. Richardson's pattern isn't just a personal problem. It's a reflection of how celebrity culture insulates people from real consequences. Let's be honest about what happened here. After the domestic violence incident, there were no charges filed. Public apology was accepted. Her career was unaffected. Her sponsor stayed, Nike to be precise. After the speeding arrest, bond set at $500, released the same day, pleads not guilty, and her life continues. Now imagine if Richardson weren't an Olympic gold medalist. Imagine if she were just a regular 25-year-old with no fame, no platform, or no status. Would the domestic violence incident have been dropped so quickly? Would bond have been set at just $500 for driving 104 miles per hour through traffic? The answer is probably not. And that's the problem. When you're famous, the rules apply differently. Not officially, not on paper, but in practice. You get more chances, more benefit of the doubt, more opportunities to apologize and move on without facing real consequences. And when that happens repeatedly, it creates a feedback loop. The person begins to believe consciously or unconsciously that the rules don't really apply to them, that they can apologize their way out of anything, that consequences are always negotiable until they are not. And that's exactly what we saw Sha'Carri trying to do in the video footage. That's exactly what we saw her doing. Here's what concerns me about this situation, because the patterns escalate. They don't stay static. They don't just repeat in the same form forever. They get worse, because when behavior goes unchecked, when consequences are constantly avoided, the threshold for what's acceptable shifts. Domestic violence incident at an airport, and then now we move straight to a reckless driving at 104 miles per hour. What could be next? I don't know, and hopefully nothing. Hopefully this is where the pattern stops. Hopefully Sha'Carri recognizes that this trajectory leads nowhere good and makes different choices. But patterns do not change on their own. They change when someone decides to take accountability serious, when they stop making excuses, when they recognize that their actions have consequences, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them as well. Because Here's the reality. Driving 104 miles per hour through traffic isn't just dangerous for Richardson. It's dangerous for everyone on that road. If something had gone wrong, if a tire had blown, if another car had emerged unexpectedly, if she had to brake suddenly, people could have died. Not as a hypothetical, as a direct result of her choices. And that's when it stops being about celebrity or personal struggles or past trauma. This is when it becomes about basic responsibility to the people around you. Sprinting is one of the most competitive disciplines in all of athletics. Dominance is short lived. New contenders emerge just as quickly as they fade. We're already seeing athletes like Melissa Jefferson rising through the ranks and challenging for the top spot in the US. So the window at the top is narrow. And right now, Sha'Carri seems to be spending time out of it. Look, I do not know Sha'Carri Richardson personally. I don't know what's going on in her life, what pressure she's under, or what struggles she's facing that we don't see. But I do know this: patterns matter. Not because they define who someone is forever, but because they reveal what someone chooses to do or not to do when faced with consequences. And right now, the pattern is clear. There's a behavior, there's a consequence, there's excuses, there's move on, and then she repeats it. That's not sustainable, not for Richardson, not for the people around her, and not for anyone looking up to her as a role model. So, what needs to change? Real accountability, not just apologies, not just explanations, but actual change in behavior, actual consequences that aren't negotiable, actual recognition that time frame and success do not exempt you from basic responsibility. And maybe, just maybe, this is the moment where that happens, where the pattern breaks, where someone decides that enough is enough and makes different choices. I hope it is for Richardson's sake and for everyone else's sake. But patterns don't just affect the person living them, they affect everyone in their orbit. And the longer they go unchecked, the higher the cost becomes. Richardson has pleaded not guilty. She'll have a day in court, and maybe there's more to the story than what we see in the body cam footage or the arrest reports. But based on what we know right now, this looks like a pattern, and patterns demand accountability. Not punishment for the sake of punishment, but real change, real consequences, real growth, because that's the only way patterns break. Subscribe to Viewspot for more commentary. Until next time, thank you.